Number 1. Edward Dalton Haffey. Edward Dalton Haffey was hiding behind a bedroom door in a blue Cape Cod house on Southeast Evergreen Street in Portland, Oregon, on the evening of September 6, 2006. He was wearing yellow rubber gloves and holding a red and black claw hammer. The house belonged to a 51-year-old emergency room nurse named Susan Kuhnhausen, and Haffey had been hired to kill her. He had disabled the home security system, using codes provided by the woman's estranged husband, entered through an unlocked door, closed the bedroom curtains to darken the room, and positioned himself where he would have the element of surprise. He had been waiting for approximately 40 minutes. Haffey was 59 years old, stood 5 feet 9 inches tall, and weighed 180 pounds. He was a convicted felon with a criminal record that included conspiracy to commit aggravated murder, robbery, burglary, and drug charges. He had served 9 years in prison for arranging the murder of his ex-girlfriend in 1991 and was released in 2003. After his release, he moved to Portland, lived in a trailer on Northeast Killingsworth Street, and was addicted to crack cocaine. In July 2004, Haffey was hired as a custodian at Fantasy Adult Video, a business on Southeast 82nd Avenue. His supervisor was Michael Kuhnhausen, a janitorial manager whose marriage to Susan Kuhnhausen was falling apart. By early 2006, Susan had asked Michael to move out. By June, she had filed for divorce. Michael had lost his job, had nowhere to live, and faced significant financial losses in the divorce. The couple's house was worth approximately $300,000, and Michael was still listed on the deed. If Susan died before the divorce was finalized, Michael would inherit the house. According to investigators and witness statements, Michael Kuhnhausen offered Edward Haffey $50,000 to kill his wife. $25,000 up front, $25,000 upon completion. In Haffey's day planner, an entry dated September 4th, 2 days before the attack, read, "Call Mike. Get letter." Michael Kuhnhausen's cell phone number was written inside a folder in the same planner. On the afternoon of September 6th, Michael drove to Lincoln City, Oregon, and checked into a hotel, creating an alibi that placed him 80 miles from Portland. He had already provided Haffey with Susan's address, her work schedule, and the codes to disable her home security system. Michael entered the house earlier that day and left a note on the kitchen counter that read, "Sue, haven't been sleeping, had to get away, went to the beach." Susan Kuhnhausen finished her shift at Providence Portland Medical Center around 6 p.m., stopped for a haircut, and arrived home at approximately 6:37 p.m. She found Michael's note, disarmed the security alarm, and walked toward the bedroom to change out of her work scrubs. The moment she stepped through the doorway, Haffey emerged from behind the door and swung the claw hammer at her head. The blow struck her directly on the left temple, fracturing bone, but she did not collapse. She lunged forward and tackled him, slamming him against the wall. As Susan pushed Haffey backward, he spoke the only words he would say during the entire attack: "You're strong." Susan understood immediately that this was not a burglary. The man had been waiting specifically for her, and he was there to kill her. The fight lasted approximately 15 minutes. Susan wrestled the hammer away and struck Haffey with it multiple times, but he regained control of the weapon. The struggle moved into the hallway. Haffey punched her in the face, splitting her lip, and she fell to the floor. As she looked up, she saw him standing over her with the hammer raised. She pulled him down to the floor and began biting him repeatedly on the arm, ribs, and thigh. If she was going to die, she wanted her teeth marks on his body, so investigators could link him to her murder through DNA evidence. Susan gained the upper position, threw her left leg over Haffey's body, and climbed on top of him. She was 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed 260 pounds. She hooked her left arm around his neck and applied a chokehold. She screamed into his face, "Tell me who sent you here, and I will call you a fucking ambulance." Haffey made a growling sound and tried to break free. Susan tightened her forearm against his throat. His face turned purple, then blue. Then he stopped moving. Susan grabbed the hammer and ran to her neighbor's house. Ann Warnock called 911. The call came in shortly before 7 p.m. Portland police officers arrived within minutes and found Edward Haffey's body lying in the hallway. He was still wearing yellow rubber gloves. An autopsy the following day confirmed the cause of death as strangulation. Toxicology tests revealed Haffey had a near-lethal dose of cocaine in his system at the time of the attack. Susan was transported to Providence Portland Medical Center, where she worked. Her injuries included a fractured skull, a split lip, and multiple bruises. She was treated and released that night. Officer Catherine Kent told reporters that homicide detectives had determined Susan Kuhnhausen killed Edward Haffey in self-defense. Under Oregon law, people can use reasonable deadly force when defending themselves against an intruder in their homes. No criminal charges were filed against Susan. Officers found a backpack near Haffey's body. Inside was the day planner with the entry, "Call Mike, get letter," and Michael Kuhnhausen's phone number. Detectives also discovered that Michael had hired Haffey as a custodian in 2004 and had supervised his work for 2 years. Police immediately began searching for Michael Kuhnhausen. On September 7th, the morning after the attack, Michael walked into a pawn shop and purchased a Taurus .357 Magnum revolver for $339. On September 8th, he left a suicide note at his father's house that read, "All I ever wanted was to be loved, and every time I had it, I fucked it up." Then he disappeared. On September 13th, a sheriff's deputy found Michael sitting in his car in a hospital parking garage. He told officers he was planning to check himself into the psychiatric facility because he had nothing left to live for. He was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. Bail was set at $1 million. During interrogation, Michael initially denied knowing Edward Haffey, despite evidence showing he had hired and supervised him. When confronted with additional evidence, he changed his story and claimed he had hired Haffey to spy on Susan for the divorce case, not to kill her. Prosecutors presented credit card records showing Michael had driven to the coast and checked into a hotel on the afternoon of the attack. The day planner, with incriminating notes, financial records, and witness testimony. On August 30th, 2007, Michael Kuhnhausen pleaded guilty to solicitation of aggravated murder. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison on September 7th, 2007, exactly 1 year and 1 day after the attack. During the sentencing hearing, Susan addressed her ex-husband directly, holding up photographs of her injuries and crime scene photos. She told him, "If I ever believed that you deserved to be dead, I would at least have had the balls to kill you myself." In March 2008, a civil jury awarded Susan $1,053,783 in damages against Michael. She stated the purpose was to ensure he would never have enough money to hire another hitman after his release. Michael Kuhnhausen died of prostate cancer in prison on June 13th, 2014, 3 months before his scheduled release. Susan Kuhnhausen, who had changed her name to Susan Walters, released a statement saying, "I don't mourn his passing. Instead, I mourn the life he could have had if only he could have opened his heart for those of us who cared about him." Number 2. Neil Martin Falls. Neil Falls was standing at Heather Saul's front door in Charleston, West Virginia, on the afternoon of July 18th, 2015. When Saul opened the door, and Falls immediately pressed a gun to her chest and said 2 words, "Live or die." He forced her inside the apartment, grabbed her by the throat, and began strangling her. He told her, "I'm going to prison for a long time, and it's your choice whether it's for rape or murder." Falls tightened his grip around her neck as Saul pleaded with him to let her breathe, but he responded, "I'm going to call the orders, and you're going to be quiet." He dragged her through the house by her throat for 10 to 15 minutes, and Saul later told police she didn't know where he was taking her, but he was determined to take her somewhere. Falls was 45 years old and had traveled to Charleston from Springfield, Oregon, weeks earlier. He had contacted Saul through Backpage.com, an online classified website often used by sex workers to advertise their services. Saul worked as an escort and had posted an advertisement, and Falls responded and arranged to meet her at her apartment on 6th Street. When he arrived at approximately 3 p.m., he was driving a gold Subaru Forester with Oregon license plates. Once inside, Falls forced Saul to undress before attacking her. Neil Falls was born on September 24th, 1969, in Eugene, Oregon, and was one of 10 children in an impoverished family. After high school, he worked low-wage jobs and eventually became a private security guard, moving frequently throughout his adult life and living in Kansas, Nevada, Indiana, Kentucky, Texas, and Oregon. Between 1995 and 2015, police stopped him in over 20 states for traffic violations, but he was never charged with any serious crimes. He did not abuse drugs or alcohol, and most people who knew him spoke positively of him. From 2000 to 2008, Falls lived in Henderson, Nevada, a suburb of Las Vegas, and worked as an unarmed security guard at Hoover Dam on the Arizona side. Co-workers reported that Falls displayed aberrant behavior, including torturing animals in the Arizona desert, and noted he was obsessed with firearms and military equipment. He regularly solicited sex workers and engaged in sex tourism in the Philippines. In 2008, Falls was fired from his job at Hoover Dam after allegations of assault, and after losing his job, he became increasingly transient, moving between multiple states over the next 7 years. During the 8 years Falls lived in Nevada, 4 sex workers disappeared from the Las Vegas area, and all 4 women advertised their services online, just like Heather Saul. On March 12, 2003, 25-year-old Misty Marie Sayans disappeared from Las Vegas, and her torso was found wrapped in black plastic bags and bed sheets off State Route 159 near Red Rock Canyon. It took 2 years to identify her through DNA. On August 14, 2003, 19-year-old Jody Marie Brewer disappeared from Las Vegas after a witness saw her get into a white car with California license plates. On August 29th, her torso was found wrapped in plastic near Interstate 15 in San Bernardino County, California, 25 miles from the Nevada border. On May 4th, 2005, 21-year-old Lindsay Marie Harris disappeared from Henderson after her rental car was found abandoned in the desert. On May 23rd, a group of children discovered human legs in a field off Interstate 55 in Divernon, Illinois, more than 1,600 miles from Las Vegas, and DNA testing in 2008 confirmed the legs belonged to Harris. On March 28, 2006, 21-year-old Jessica Edith Louise Foster disappeared from North Las Vegas and has never been found. Las Vegas police suspected these cases were connected because all 4 women were sex workers and 3 were found dismembered along highways. Falls lived in Henderson during all 4 disappearances and worked at Hoover Dam during this time period. In January 2015, Falls' mother died, and in the same month, he discovered that a woman he was seeing was married. These 2 events severely affected his emotional state. In April 2015, he underwent retraining courses to work as a security guard in Oregon, but that summer, he moved to Texas and then to Charleston, West Virginia. Between May 2014 and May 2015, 6 women disappeared or were found dead in and around Chillicothe, Ohio, a town located approximately 2 hours from Charleston. The women had drug problems and some engaged in prostitution. 4 were found dead in or near waterways, and 2 were never found. The disappearances stopped after Falls died. As Falls dragged Heather Saul through her apartment by her throat, she spotted a garden rake nearby and grabbed it. Falls set his gun down on the kitchen counter to wrestle the rake from her hands, and Saul grabbed the gun and fired a single shot behind her. The bullet struck Falls in the head, killing him instantly. Saul later told police she didn't believe the gun was loaded because Falls had been pointing it at her for 15 minutes without firing. Saul ran outside screaming, and a neighbor found her in the alley behind her apartment, pacing anxiously with visible injuries. The neighbor called 911, and Charleston police arrived at the scene and found Falls dead inside the apartment. Saul disclosed that she worked as a sex worker and explained what had happened. Officers determined it was a clear case of self-defense, and Falls was pronounced dead at the scene at approximately 3:59 p.m. Saul was not charged with any crime. Police searched Falls' vehicle, and inside the Subaru Forester, they found multiple axes, a machete, knives, a shovel, a sledgehammer, a container of bleach, a large supply of black plastic trash bags, a bulletproof vest, clean white socks and underwear, and a large Rubbermaid tub with a lid that was big enough to fit a woman's body inside. On Falls' body, officers found 4 pairs of handcuffs and a post-it note with the names, ages, and phone numbers of 6 women. All 6 were sex workers who had advertised on Backpage, and police contacted all 6 women and determined that all were alive. 5 lived in West Virginia, and 1 worked in San Diego. Investigators believe these were Fall's intended victims. Heather Saul told police in a videotaped interview that she could tell Falls was confident in what he was doing and saying, and she stated, "He had done it before. You could tell." She also said, "I've fought men my whole life. I guess I had to be ready for that guy." Lieutenant Cooper stated, "Mr. Falls got what he deserved, and for once, the victim prevailed." The Charleston Police Department called Saul a hero, and Cooper noted that although Falls had been operating for years without being caught, Saul's actions stopped him and potentially saved the lives of many other women. Number 3. Wayne Nathan Nance. Wayne Nance was hiding in the bushes outside Doug and Chris Wells' home in Missoula, Montana, at 10 minutes before midnight on September 3, 1986. The Wells had just returned home from an evening with friends and noticed an unfamiliar truck parked on their lawn, but when Doug Wells went back outside to take out the trash, the truck was gone and Nance was crouched in the bushes. Doug called out and Nance identified himself as a delivery driver from Conlon's Furniture, the store where Chris worked as manager. Nance claimed he had spotted a prowler and asked Doug for a flashlight, and Doug invited him inside. Once in the house, Nance struck Doug over the head with a gun, knocking him unconscious and causing severe bleeding, then ordered Chris at gunpoint to tie her husband up. Nance tied Chris to the bed in the upstairs bedroom using a sock and tights as a gag, then returned to the basement where he had dragged Doug. He tied Doug to a pole, viciously beat him, and stabbed him in the chest with an 8-inch knife. The blade missed Doug's heart by approximately 1 inch, and though Nance believed Doug would die from the wound, Doug remained conscious. Nance was 30 years old and had been killing in the Missoula area for 12 years. He was born in Clinton, Montana, in 1955 and graduated from Sentinel High School in 1974. Friends claimed that during his adolescence, Nance boasted of worshiping the devil and bragged that he would kill someone before he turned 19. He worked as a furniture mover and delivery driver at Conlon's Furniture, and co-workers described him as charming, quiet, and hard-working. Nance had developed an obsession with Chris Wells and had taken photographs of her from the bushes along the route where she jogged. 9 months earlier, on December 12, 1985, Nance had walked into the home of Mike and Teresa Shook in Ravalli County at 9 o'clock in the evening, introduced himself as Conan the Barbarian, and demanded their money. He shot Teresa in the leg, locked their 3 children in a bedroom, struck Mike in the head, tied him up, and stabbed him in the chest with a butcher knife. He forced Teresa upstairs, tied her to the bed, assaulted her, and stabbed her to death. He left the house, returned 2 hours later, stole an elk statue, a hunting knife, and a silver dollar collection, then attempted to set the house on fire. The fire released cyanide gas into the house, but neighbors rescued the 3 children, who survived. A neighbor saw a pickup truck matching Nance's vehicle leaving the property that night. In the basement of the Wells home, Doug managed to free himself from his bindings despite his severe injuries and retrieved a Savage .250 rifle he had been repairing. He loaded the only bullet he had into it and made noise on the stairs to draw Nance away from Chris. When Nance appeared at the top of the stairs, Doug shot him once in the side. The shot did not kill Nance, who dropped to the ground but retrieved his own gun and fired 3 rounds at Doug. All 3 shots missed. Doug beat Nance repeatedly with the rifle, striking him in the head with such force that the rifle bent into an L shape. Doug grabbed Nance's pistol and shot him in the head. Both Nance and Doug were rushed to the hospital. Doug and Chris both survived and made full recoveries. Nance died on September 4, 1968, from his injuries. The shooting was ruled justifiable self-defense. Authorities believe Nance committed at least 6 murders between 1974 and 1986, though the true number of his victims will never be known. He was never arrested, charged, tried, or convicted of any murder during his lifetime. Judge Dusty Deschamps, who was the Missoula County attorney at the time, later held up a photograph of the bent rifle and said, "Imagine the amount of force, the amount of anger needed to make that happen. Wayne Nance died at age 30, and Doug Wells survived despite being stabbed in the chest and beaten." Number 4. Bruce Lindahl. Bruce Lindahl was waiting inside his girlfriend's apartment at 1041 West Ogden Avenue in Naperville, Illinois, on the evening of April 4th, 1981, when he invited 18-year-old Charles Huber Jr. inside. Lindahl had met Huber earlier that night at Gala Lane's bowling alley on Aurora Avenue. Once inside the apartment, Lindahl attacked Huber with a 6-inch kitchen knife. During the struggle, as Lindahl stabbed Huber repeatedly, the blade accidentally plunged into Lindahl's own thigh and severed his femoral artery. Lindahl had stabbed Huber 28 times, and both men died at the scene. Lindahl's girlfriend discovered the bodies the next morning on April 5th and called police. Lindahl was lying on top of Huber near the sliding glass door. Police initially believed they were investigating a double homicide, but the autopsy revealed that Lindahl had bled to death from the self-inflicted wound to his thigh. The motive for Huber's murder was never determined. Bruce Lindahl was 28 years old and had been operating as a serial killer in the Chicago suburbs since at least 1974. He was born on January 29, 1953, in St. Charles, Illinois, and graduated from Downers Grove North High School in 1971. He worked as an electrician and vocational instructor and had numerous arrests between 1974 and 1981 for assault, illegal weapons possession, but had never served prison time. Charles Huber was a senior at Waubonsie Valley High School and lived at 5S 219 Allister Lane in Naperville. He had gone bowling at Gala Lanes that evening and met Lindahl. After bowling, Lindahl invited Huber to his girlfriend's apartment, and Huber agreed. Once inside, Lindahl attacked him with the kitchen knife. Huber fought back, and a violent struggle ensued in the living room near the sliding glass door. During the fight, Lindahl drove the knife into his own thigh and severed his femoral artery, causing massive bleeding. Lindahl died on top of Huber's body. Naperville police officers, including Rookie Patrol Officer Robert Marshall, responded to the scene the following morning. The officers secured the scene and began processing evidence. A 6-inch kitchen knife was found near the bodies, and there were clear signs of a struggle. An autopsy was performed on both bodies, and the medical examiner determined that Charles Huber had died from multiple stab wounds and Bruce Lindahl had died from the self-inflicted wound. Police concluded there were no additional suspects. Both the perpetrator and the victim were dead. After Lindahl's death, police searched his apartment and found numerous photographs of young women. Authorities suspected Lindahl had been responsible for multiple murders and disappearances in the Chicago suburbs, but because DNA technology did not exist in 1981 and Lindahl had died before being identified as a suspect in any of the killings, the cases remained unsolved for decades. In September 2019, Lisle Police Detective Chris Loudon reopened a 1976 cold case murder and sent DNA evidence to Parabon Labs. The lab compared the DNA to public genealogy databases and built a family tree that pointed to Bruce Lindahl. Loudon obtained a court order to exhume Lindahl's body, and on January 13, 2020, DuPage County announced that DNA confirmed Lindahl had killed 16-year-old Pamela Maurer in 1976. This was the first murder case in Illinois solved using investigative genealogy. In October 2024, DNA evidence also linked Lindahl to the 1979 murder of 19-year-old Kathy Halley. Detective Loudon stated that Lindahl would have continued killing if he had not died in 1981, noting that he was just getting into his pattern and had figured out how to dispose of evidence. Naperville Police Chief Robert Marshall, who was one of the first officers at the scene in 1981, stated that although it was tragic for Charles Huber, the stabbing stopped Lindahl from victimizing more people, and that justice can be delivered in many different ways. Charles Huber died at age 18, fighting back during the attack, and that resistance caused Lindahl to accidentally stab himself. Bruce Lindahl died on April 4, 1981, at age 28, ending a 7-year killing spree. Number 5. Dean Corll. Dean Arnold Corll was waiting at his home at 2020 Lamar Drive in Pasadena, Texas, on the evening of August 7, 1973, when his 17-year-old accomplice Elmer Wayne Henley arrived with 2 teenagers. Corll had been operating as a serial killer for 3 years with the help of Henley and another teenager named David Owen Brooks, and he had murdered at least 29 boys between the ages of 13 and 20 in the Houston area. Henley had brought 20-year-old Timothy Curley to Corll's house that night as another potential victim, but he had also brought 15-year-old Rhonda Williams, a friend who had just escaped from her abusive father. The three teenagers arrived at approximately 3 o'clock in the morning, and Coral was furious that Henley had brought a girl to his house, telling him in private that he had ruined everything. Coral remained outwardly calm and offered the trio beer and marijuana, and the three began drinking and smoking marijuana, while Henley and Curly also sniffed acrylic paint fumes from a bag as Coral watched them intently before seemingly retiring to his bedroom. After approximately 2 hours, Henley, Curly, and Williams each passed out. Henley woke to find himself gagged and pinioned face down, with Coral placing handcuffs on his wrists and binding his ankles. Curly and Williams had also been bound and gagged, and were lying alongside Henley on the floor, with Curly having been stripped naked. Coral informed Henley he was furious he had brought a girl to his home, stating that Henley had blown it, before repeatedly kicking Williams in the chest and shouting for her to wake up. When all three had woken, Coral began shouting as he waved an 18-inch hunting knife at them, saying he was going to kill them all, but first he was going to have his fun. Henley pleaded for his life and promised to participate in the torture and murder of the others if Coral released him. After several minutes, Coral agreed and untied Henley, then separately carried Curly and Williams into his bedroom and tied them to opposite sides of his plywood torture board, which measured 8 feet by 2.5 feet, with handcuffs and ropes affixed to both sides. The board was placed above a layer of thick plastic sheeting, with Curly tied on his stomach and Williams on her back. Coral placed a transistor radio between them and turned the volume to maximum to drown out any screaming, then handed Henley a long hunting knife and ordered him to cut away Williams's clothes. Coral insisted that he would rape and kill Curly, and that Henley must do likewise to Williams, and he placed his .22 caliber pistol on the bedside table before undressing and climbing on top of Curly. Henley began cutting off Williams's trousers and underwear as Coral had ordered, but Williams looked at Henley and asked if he was going to do anything about this. Henley stood at Williams's feet and told Coral that this couldn't keep going on, that he couldn't let him keep killing his friends, and that it had to stop. Coral looked up surprised and started getting up, saying Henley wasn't going to do anything to him. Henley grabbed Coral's pistol from the bedside table and shouted that Coral had gone far enough, that he couldn't go on any longer, and that he couldn't have Coral kill all his friends. Henley shot Coral in the forehead, but it didn't kill him, and Coral attacked. Henley fired 5 more times, and Coral slid away and dropped onto his side. Dean Arnold Coral died early in the morning of August 8th, 1973, at approximately 6 o'clock at age 33. After Henley shot Coral, he and Curly began weeping as Curly repeatedly thanked him for saving his life, and Henley released Curly and Williams from the torture board. All three teenagers dressed and discussed what actions they should take. Henley suggested they should simply leave, but Curly stated they should call the police. At 8:24 a.m. on August 8th, Henley telephoned the Pasadena Police Department and blurted to the operator to come right now because he had just killed a man. Pasadena Police Detective David Mullican responded to the scene at 2020 Lamar Drive. Henley told police Coral had tortured and murdered teenagers at the home, and later that day, Henley led police to a boat storage shed in southwest Houston on Silver Bell Street, where police began digging and found 8 bodies that afternoon. The next day, August 9th, police uncovered 9 more bodies at the shed, for a total of 17 bodies buried in stall number 11 at Southwest Boat Storage. Inside the shed, police found a bag of the boys' clothing and the bike of a 13-year-old on the ground. That afternoon, Henley accompanied police to Lake Sam Rayburn, where 4 more bodies were recovered from shallow, lime-soaked graves. Inside the lakeside log cabin owned by Coral's family, police found a second plywood torture board, rolls of plastic sheeting, shovels, and a sack of lime. Henley then led authorities to High Island Beach on the Bolivar Peninsula, where 6 more bodies were recovered. The day after Henley's arrest, 18-year-old David Owen Brooks turned himself into police for his role in the deaths. On August 10th, Brooks gave a full confession in which he admitted being present at several killings and assisting in several burials, although he continued to deny any direct participation in the murders. In total, 27 bodies were recovered in August 1973. At the time of their discovery, the Houston mass murders were considered the worst example of serial murder in American history. The case attracted international media attention, and Houston police were heavily criticized for not properly investigating the young men's disappearances, despite the fact that many were reported missing from the same neighborhood. Dean Arnold Corll had been born December 24, 1939, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and had moved to Texas with his family when he was 16. His mother had owned a candy-making business called Corll Candy Company in Houston Heights, where Corll worked as vice president from 1963 until 1968. He became known for giving free candy to local children, particularly teenage boys, earning him the nicknames the Candy Man and the Pied Piper. After his mother sold the candy company and moved to Colorado in 1968, Corll began working as an electrician for Houston Lighting and Power Company. Between 1970 and 1973, Corll murdered at least 29 teenage boys and young men with the help of David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley. Corll had befriended 12-year-old David Brooks in the mid-1960s when Brooks stopped at the candy factory, which was across the street from his elementary school, and Corll became a father figure to Brooks. Around 1970, Brooks interrupted Corll in the act of raping 2 teenage boys strapped to a torture board, and Corll promised Brooks a car in return for his silence. Corll then offered Brooks $200 for any boy he could lure to Corll's apartment, and in February 1971, Corll bought Brooks a green Chevrolet Corvette as a 16th birthday present. In approximately October 1971, Brooks introduced 15-year-old Elmer Wayne Henley to Corll, and Corll became a father figure to Henley as well. Corll told Henley he would pay him $200 for every boy he could bring in, though in reality, Corll usually paid the boys just $5 or $10. Corll's victims were lured into his vehicles with offers of parties or rides, and at Corll's residence, the youths would be plied with alcohol or drugs until they passed out, tricked into donning handcuffs, or simply grabbed by force. They were then stripped naked and tied to Corll's plywood torture board, where they would be sexually assaulted, beaten, and tortured, sometimes for several days, before being killed by strangulation or shooting with a .22 caliber pistol. On July 16, 1974, after the jury deliberated for 90 minutes, Henley was convicted of 6 murders and sentenced to 6 consecutive 99-year terms, a total of 594 years. Henley was not charged with the death of Corll, which prosecutors had ruled had been committed in self-defense. Henley appealed his conviction, and his appeal was upheld on December 20, 1978. His second trial was held in Corpus Christi in June 1979, and on June 27th, the jury again convicted him of 6 murders and again sentenced him to 6 99-year terms, only to run concurrently this time rather than consecutively. David Brooks was brought to trial in Houston on February 27, 1975, charged with the June 1973 murder of 15-year-old William Ray Lawrence. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes before finding him guilty, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment on March 4, 1975. Brooks appealed his sentence, but his appeal was dismissed in May 1979. David Owen Brooks died of COVID-19-related complications in a Galveston hospital at age 65 on May 28, 2020, having served 45 years of a life sentence. Elmer Wayne Henley is currently incarcerated within the Telford unit in Bowie County, Texas, and has been denied parole multiple times, most recently in November 2025. The remains of a 28th victim were found in 1983 and identified through DNA testing in 2009. As of today, all of Corll's victims have been identified except one, whose name remains a mystery. He is known as John Doe, 1973, or Swimsuit Boy. In each of these cases, the turning point came in the same place, a moment where someone thought they had complete control. The people who planned these attacks believed their victims were powerless, predictable, and easy to eliminate. What they didn't plan for was resistance, circumstance, or the sheer instinct to stay alive. If you've been following this series, thank you for watching. Stay with us, subscribe, and let us know which cases you want us to examine next, because every real case has lessons hidden in the details, and the more closely we look, the more clearly those lessons appear.